Towers were built with skyscraper crashes in mind.
The airplane we were envisioning was the largest airplane of its time, flying slowly and low, lost in the fog. We designed the building to take the impact of the Boeing 707 hitting the building at any location.
In fact, his boss, John Stilling, states that they designed it to resist the same airplane going 600 miles an hour. And when he was asked in '93 if he considered plane crashes, he said the biggest problem would be the fact that all the fuel would dump into the building, but the structure would still be there. So contrary to what NIST, those from NIST suggest, they did take it into account, the fuel of the fires. Now, either way, the building was impacted by the jet planes, and it performed admirably, as those from the official story tell us also. It oscillated as it's supposed to, and it stood fine. But what they claim is that the jet impacts stripped much of the steel of its fireproofing and made it vulnerable. We'll take a look at that in a minute. But we have an effort, a distinct effort by FEMA and here through NOVA and other proponents of the official story to help us believe how this building could fall down so easily. It's a stack of pancakes, after all, ready to just fall. There's no core structure even represented. And in the case of these trusses, there's no cross trusses. There's no composite concrete and steel decking, which also resists a tendency to sag in hot fires. Now, this on the lower right, we see the FEMA diagram indicating the core columns get almost as small as the perimeter columns when they're shown correctly on this particular plan, orthogonally or in line, and to scale or to their right side. And so there's this incredible effort to deny the core that we see. But we did get a leaked set of architectural plans from the Silverstein-Weidlinger report, somebody who was associated with them. And you can download these now from our website, ad911truth.org. And it's very interesting. It shows all of the proper relationship of the core columns, as we've just seen in the more accurate diagram. So these are the trusses which are blamed for the FEMA calls the pancaking, where what happens is there's a fire hot enough under the trusses to where they sag and then pulled away from the core column, the further columns. And then that was a kind of a zippering effect all the way around the building. Now this comes along and reverses that theory and says, no, they blame the persistence of those connections where the floor then sags and then pulls the column inward, causing it to buckle. Either way, it starts out with what they say is an 1,800-degree fire, which there's no evidence for, and we'll take a look. And there's a kind of a difference between the pancaking and the core column failure. So we'll show you how interesting that is in a minute. Now, it's kind of difficult for people to understand that the Twin Towers were a controlled demolition because it doesn't look like the classic controlled demolition that we just compared Building 7 to. It was a very unique demolition. So if you want people to blame the airplanes for the building's failure, you would start the demolition at the point of the airplanes and then progress downward, and as we'll see, upward as well. So we have all the same elements of the characteristic features of controlled demolition with a few key differences. We have a rapid onset of destruction, not at the base of the building, but at the point of jet plane impact. The columns are cut on the floor, but they're not just cut, they're exploded outward, as you can see in this video photo here. And this all results in a symmetrical collapse, but not into its own footprint, but everything, as we'll see, is blown outside its own footprint. So let's take a look then and march through all of this evidence, starting first with sights and sounds produced by explosions, and with Jim Hoff.
The way I describe what happened to the towers is that they were, I don't think you can get around calling these explosions. these clouds of dust were steel hurling in all directions. And these explosions became over 500 feet in diameter by the time they reached the ground. Actually, more like 800 feet in diameter. And but the reason I think people don't think of them as explosions is because they occurred over a period of 15 seconds in either case. So there wasn't a particularly normally people think of an explosion as you hear a loud crack, bang, and then it's just that one event. But if you have, in the case of a demolition where you might have thousands of explosions that are all blending in, then you get one huge explosive event. You don't hear any distinct explosions that's so much above the roar of it. The thing sounded sort of like an ocean wave, just this incredibly loud roar. But incredibly explosive. The tops I described them as mushrooms because they blew out so far.
In fact, they blew out 1,200 feet in diameter. Now, very interestingly, the Thomas Von Eschen, the city fire commissioner, recorded over 1,000 first responders, and 118 of them described explosions at the onset of the collapse of these two buildings. And this was not, we didn't know this until August of 2005 when the New York Times secured their release from the city of New York in the lawsuit, which was finally overturned in their favor in 2005 by the New York Court State of Appeals. Let's find out why the city didn't want us to have this information. I'll read you all 118 of them. But I'll read you a few. We felt the ground shake. You could see the tower sway, and then it just came down. All of a sudden, the ground just started shaking. Well, why is the ground shaking? It shook my bones shortly before the first tower came down. I remember feeling the ground shaking, heard a terrible noise, and then debris just started flying everywhere. Saw a number of brief light sources being emitted from inside the building between floors 10 and 15. Brief flashes accompanied by a crackling sound. I saw low-level flashes. Somewhere around the middle of the World Trade Center, there was this orange and red flash coming out. Well, let's take a look and see what the news reporters say.
We heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted.
The entire building just collapsed as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old buildings, it falls down on itself.
Anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.
Like it's like gunfire, bang, 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 and then all of a sudden, three big explosions.
At 10:30, I tried to leave the building, but as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion, and another rumble, and more smoke, and more dust. I ran inside the building, the chandelier shook, and again, black smoke filled the air. Within another 5 minutes, we were covered again with more silt and more dust. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
Heavy-duty explosions. The full impact was seen in the moments in time. My colleague Stephen Evans, who was in the trade centre and was interviewed just after the first explosion.
There was a big explosion. Any other time, flames coming out and billowing grey smoke.
Well, none of these explosions were a part of the official story at all. Let's go on. With those 118, it seemed like on television when they blow up these buildings, it seemed like it was going all the way around a belt, like all these explosions. In fact, we can hear Louis Caccioli.
Made outside, we made about a block.
We made at least 2 blocks, and we started floor by floor. It's a rocket out. All the way down. It was launching and running. It just ran up. And then you just sort of this cloud of shit chasing me down. I ran the first street. I could outrun it. I jumped behind a Italian car. I hit on the car. It was swinging the
With each popping sound, it was initially an orange and then a red flash coming out of the building. First I thought, you ever see those professional demolition where they set charge on certain floors and you hear pop, pop, pop? That's exactly what, because I thought. And when I heard the friggin' noise and I saw the building coming down. So then it was blowing out on all 4 sides. You actually heard the pops. You know there were pops in the building. I thought the terrorists planted explosives somewhere in the building. That's how loud it was, a crackling explosive. Suddenly, a really loud boom in the upper floors, and there was a series of smaller explosions, which appeared